Welcome to Superchargers. I'm Daniel Thomas. Let's go. G'day guys, my guest on this episode is Juanita Wheeler. Juanita is a powerhouse in the world of public speaking. She is a public speaking coach, CEO and head of curation at TEDxBrisbane. Through her company Full and Frank, she delivers blunt yet effective coaching, empowering her clients to overcome challenges and champion their ideas. It was so awesome to chat with Juanita. If you're someone who feels you have something to say or perhaps fears public speaking, this is the episode for you. Enjoy this one, guys. To bring it back a little bit, did you always have a fascination in communication? I see you've got 3 master's degrees. Where do you think it began for you, this curiosity towards as you've said, the art and the science of communication?
But there's probably 2 parts to that answer. If you had asked me a short while ago, I would have said it was a professional problem in that I am an introvert. People are quite shocked when I tell them, but I'm absolutely an introvert. And I also, public speaking never came naturally to me. It's not something I'm comfortable with. It wasn't my ideal circumstance. And so professionally, I would find myself in situations where I was trying to champion ideas. My go-to preference was to put things in paper. So I would write really compelling proposals and great pitches, and there'd be all the details, and it would be, look, do this, it's so clear. And then I would find myself in a room with people who were making decisions. And often it's before that, it's around the water cooler or in the lunchroom that people are deciding what's going to happen. And what I was discovering was that whoever would stand up and champion their idea persuasively, verbally, even if the idea wasn't that great, their ideas were getting up instead of mine. So, that vexed me somewhat. And so I'll just did a little whinge about that or sulked about it for a little bit and went, that's not helping anybody, but mostly me. And so I said, okay, I'm going to have to put aside the fact that I regard myself as an introvert, that I don't want to put my hand up and stand up in front of people and champion these ideas. If I care about them, if I want to fast track my career, if I want to be known as a thought leader, if I want these ideas to turn into action, I'm going to have to suck it up and learn how to champion it. And so I said, okay, well, how do I do that? And being a bit of a nerd, I was like, well, let's find the science behind it. So let's not just, I wasn't interested in somebody telling me, well, modulate your voice and stick your hands in these positions when you speak. Like, no, I wanted to understand how the brain works. So if I was going to invest time in speaking to them, like, how do I get somebody to move from just hearing me to listening to me? And then how do I get them to be persuaded that what I'm saying is right and get them to say yes at the end of a conversation and do something? And so I, doubled down on reading everything I could find. Like I was reading studies, the neuroscience, the research, behavioral economics, behavioral psychology, what people do in politics, what people do in advertising. If it was something I could get my hands on through a research paper, I was on it. And then I went, okay, cool. Now I have to work out how to put this in a system, first of all, for me. And then once I had nailed it, having said that, I 100% made every mistake it was possible to make as part of this process. But once I'd landed it, then I had other people coming and saying, you're a really great speaker. Can you teach me how to do that? So initially it was just something I was doing while I was also working in, global multinationals and such. And then when I eventually left my corporate and started my own company 11 years ago, it, became increasingly a part of my life. And then I started running TEDx. I was originally just a member of the audience, and then I became a volunteer, and then I spoke and gave my own TEDx talk, and then the person who was running it asked me to take over. And I've been running it since 2015. So no, I have not always been really passionate about communication. It was something I struggled with, so I had to learn to do it well because it's just essential. It's not an optional skill to have. Everything in your life, particularly your professional life, gets better when you can do it. So that's the most relevant answer. But in recent years, I've come to reflect that as a young child, I had an abusive and neglectful childhood. And as part of that, I wasn't having my voice heard. I was trying to communicate that I was in trouble and needed help, and nobody came and rescued me. So it's only in recent years I've had that revelation when someone kind of pointed that out to me. I'm like, oh, yes, it's not surprising that I'm now dedicating myself to make sure people are having their voices heard and can communicate their ideas and messages in clear ways, because I couldn't do that. And that resulted in, a very bad situation for me. But now I'm paying it forward positively by making sure other people can communicate really well.
That must have been an awesome moment when, as you say, you came from a kind of introverted place to then people asking you how to teach them. That must have spun you out a little bit. And it sounds like that was in quite a short amount of time as well, after you consumed all this information that you could. That must have been like a crazy moment.
It was. And being the introvert, I immediately freaked out about it, because it wasn't like, hey, this is cool. It was like, oh my gosh, no, now somebody wants me to come and talk to them and explain to them what works in my brain and how I've gathered all this data. And are they going to think I'm a super nerd because I've got color coded, cross referenced, peer reviewed academic journals from like 200 different people? But no, it was, so once I got used to the idea that I did it really well. And that really only happened when people who, uh, I always say, I do what I do because of your success stories. And that really was true. When other people would come back from a conference they hadn't been prepared to speak at, or they pitched to the executive inside our company and got their idea up, or maybe they went and landed a new client in a great partnership pitch, and they come back and say, thank you so much. Like, I was awesome. I'm like, great. And they're like, I couldn't have done this before. I said, I just needed to understand how it works, and now I can do it. I'm like, great. So really the exciting moment, the whiplash, oh my gosh, I'm good at this, came. And it still happens every time somebody has a really successful keynote or a TEDx talk, or they present to their boss, or they get a pay rise, whatever it is. Um, they let you know. They're the good moments. They're the days when you put your head on the pillow at the end of the day and go, you know what, this is awesome.
Mm. It's interesting what you said about, the message landing in the office or wherever it may be. Having worked in architecture, I saw it a lot in terms of trying to communicate a very complex idea very quickly to clients. And I always remember there was presentation for quite a big project, and I spent the week sort of putting all this stuff together and kind of overcooking a lot of the information. And then one of the main architects, literally like half an hour before the meeting, he just did this beautiful little sketch. And when all the heavies came in for the project, he just communicated this idea in such a simple way. And I'd spent the week like, tearing my hair out trying to put all this stuff together. And I thought, okay, he literally, it may have been on a serviette, one of those sort of things. But the point is, and he was a very introverted guy as well. But the point is, he was just able to communicate this very simple thing, and I saw it land. It just reminded me of that when with what you were saying about the water cooler or wherever it may be.
Absolutely. And simplicity is like the hardest thing, or one of the absolute hardest things to do well with public speaking. It's like that Mark Twain quote, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have that much time. It's really quite easy to talk about something and just, flap your gums for a long time. The smarts and the effective persuasive speaking, where someone will say yes at the end, is where you do the work to make sure, what does the audience need to hear that I'm talking to? What do I have to tell them to get them to say yes? How do I serve them and make it a really easy yes for them? And how do I do it in the shortest and simplest amount of time? So I need to not waffle. I need to not use jargon. I need to not have any really great witty anecdotes that are interesting to me and nobody else. I need to not talk about what I think is sexy or exciting because I'm deeply involved in this field of study or work. I just need to tell them what they need to know as simply as easily as possible. And one of the really important things we do when we start with any of my clients, but also with my TEDx speakers. And I'll say, great, what is your idea in 12 words or less? And it is hilarious, not to them, but occasionally to me still, how difficult this is for people. In that, people will come, and when we approach someone to give a TEDx talk, and these are really very intellectual, highly researched experts in their field, and someone will come in and say, well, here's the title of my recent paper or my conference presentation or what have you, and it'll be between 27 and 36 words long and filled with jargon. And I'll be, okay, well, now we need to get this down to 12 words or less so people can digest it, take away, and own it themselves. We have one example, an amazing woman here in Brisbane, and she's doing studies in her lab. And, it's not out there. The clinical trials are still to be done. But, in her lab, early studies are showing that they're able to kill all 4 strains of dengue virus, as well as the Zika virus, using an extract from an Australian native plant.
Oh, wow.
Which, I'm keep me updated. This is
Mm.
really amazing. It will change the world if it all comes good. And, but, it was incredibly her, when she described her idea, it was lots of jargon and very technical language. And, we went through it. And at the time she was going to give a TEDx talk on the Zika component of it. And, we ended up getting it down to curing the Zika virus with an Australian native plant. So,
Wow.
we
Yeah,
got this
very punchy.
36 words down to 7.
Mm.
And how you'll know you've really nailed it is if there's somebody you're talking to, if it's at a conference presentation, if it's in a boardroom, it doesn't really matter. But let's assume for a second the critical decision maker is not in the room. But somebody who talks to them is. And when you finish presenting and that person walks out of the room and texts them or phones them or sees them at their office door and says, I just saw the most amazing talk, you really need to know about it, they will then say, what was it about? And if you've done your job well, what comes out of their mouths next will be your idea in 12 words or less. So it would be the equivalent of, oh, it was about curing the Zika virus with an Australian native plant. But yes, so, being able to do it in a way, as you said, that person did it with a beautiful sketch that they just pulled together last minute. But I think that showed a level of understanding of this is how you get it down to its most basic, easy to understand, emotional form that people can just run with.
I love that economy of words, trimming things down to their essence. And like you say, if somebody's seen it and it's landed and they're able to communicate that straight back in its kind of purest, minimal text form, it means that the communication has happened very, very cleanly. So that's very cool. Not to bring it back too much to me, but I think this speaks to the fear of public speaking. One of my first experiences, in high school, we had a paper for our final year English class, and I had to do a social issue, and I wrote this paper, and I saw that I was due to present it after the school holidays. So there was a 2-week school holiday, and I was the first one after. And I put so much pressure and so much anxiety around this talk that I decided it was going to ruin my school holidays. I was like, this is going to ruin my school holidays. So I went to the teacher on the last week of school, and I basically begged her and said, would you let me do this talk before the holidays? Because I was in so much fear of it letting it destroy my holidays. So she saw the anxiety, and she was like, sure, you can do it on the Friday. And I literally had the paper. I got up, I put my head down, I read it as fast as humanly possible, basically said thank you and sat down. And the the surprise in that was that she was still extremely encouraging of me. The message and what I'd written was there, but I had just absolutely let this fear in a kind of scientific way, this fight or flight had just absolutely got the better of me. And the fact that I had already decided it was going to ruin my school holidays and all that sort of thing, in hindsight, I realized that it was perhaps something that I actually needed to lean into, because I think it really showed that I cared. There were other things that I didn't get that kind of anxious about. And in hindsight, I think it was like you cared about it so much that you put all this pressure on it. But I remember the kind of mini trauma of it. So I think it's a good example of, when you're young, just this fear we all have, and you've mentioned it yourself, particularly as an introverted person. Um, yeah. So how do we address this? I guess there's so many layers to it, but how, for me, especially in acting and casting, it's like trying not to let this fight or flight overtake me and put me in a place where I'm just kind of reactive.
So yes, there are so many layers to the whole issue about associated with fear of public speaking, but I'll try to talk to some of it that I think will be most helpful to
Mm,
people because I like to be helpful. So first of all, if you're at the point where your fear immediately, and fear happens at multiple times in a public speaking journey. So there's sort of really common ones I see all the time. First of all, there's the fear before you get a speaking gig. And that's the fear. And it's usually things like imposter syndrome or I'm not worthy. So they won't even put their hands up and apply for speaking gigs or put their name out there as a potential speaker because, they'll say, oh, look, I'm so terrified of public speaking, I'm never going to do it. And the first thing I'll say to them is, do you speak in public when you leave the house? Because if the answer is yes, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're already public speaking. There are multiple forms of public speaking. You're already doing that one. So, we need to start breaking that fear level down a little. But, that first type of fear is I'm so afraid that I won't even apply. And that's a real problem because there are people out there with incredibly brilliant ideas and things the world needs to hear. And it never makes it out of their shower or their car or their office cubicle. So, that's problematic. So it's something I'm, very passionate about breaking down. But when you actually talk to a lot of those people, and some of those people are people I approach to give TEDx talks because their idea is so important. And I've read a paper or I've seen something in some PhD work that's come out. And I'll say, you need to give a TEDx talk. The world needs to know about this. Like, couldn't possibly, you've got the wrong person. I'm not worthy. I'm like, hi, are you, in the case of um, the one I was just talking about, my understanding, and I'm not a scientist, is you've potentially discovered the cure for the dengue fever for the entire planet. Is that you? Oh, well, yes. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm talking to the right person. But so, yeah, so that's the first kind of fear. And so that requires work about saying, what are you actually scared of? And for a lot of people, what they're scared of is, oh, well, I'm scared what my peers will think. I'm scared I'm not good enough. I'm scared I'm embarrassed myself. There are lots of other things rather than the I'm worried I'll forget my words. That's kind of later. That's sort of the second zone of fear, which is when you've got a speaking gig, you knew you were going to have to speak and give this paper, and you're thinking of all the things that could possibly go wrong. And so the first thing there are two things I do in that phase is I say to people, okay, first of all, list every single thing that you think could possibly go wrong, and we're going to stick it into a spreadsheet. Like, feel free to end, like I'll start it and it starts with zombie apocalypse, but you fill out the other things. And then we will go, cool. In the next column, we're going to talk about all the things that you can do to mitigate that risk. So if you're worried you're worried you're going to forget your lines, let's make sure we lock in the script way ahead. And let's, commit, you're going to get up 30 minutes earlier every day for 30 days to work on memorizing it. So that doesn't happen. You're afraid your suit won't come back in time from the thing and you'll be naked. Cool. Let's make sure we pick up the dry cleaning a week before. And we will just go down this whole list. And it's incredibly empowering for people to go, to write their fears down in detail. And then we come up with a plan of all the things we can do to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's really helpful. When also the other thing I do with people, this is great. When people say I'm really scared of people looking at me when I speak, or, I don't like to be the center of attention, I get really anxious. I'm like, great. And depending on whether they live near a beach or a park, beaches are ideal. I'm like, go to the beach, draw a circle akin to a red circle on a TEDx stage. You're going to stand in it and you're going to talk. Ideally, you're saying your speech, but if it's not written, you're just going to talk and, wax lyrical about a particular topic, and the people are going to be walking past, the joggers, the people walking their dogs, and they're going to look at you, and you're just going to ignore it and keep going. And by the time we get to the point where you are doing it on a stage, you will be so used to people looking at you and distractions, you can just roll on. But you'd rather get used to that, you know, at the beach or in your local park 30 days out from an event than have that moment on stage. So, there are things to do about that. And immediately before you speak, one of the things that has astounded me with working with TEDx speakers is backstage, the varied ways in which people calm themselves and prep themselves for the event is incredibly varied. So I've seen a very competent and qualified, more mature, white lady academic who, when I approached her and she was getting ready in the zone, she had headphones on that were blaring "Killing in the Name of" by Rage Against the Machine. I'm like, okay.
I love it.
Then there was a guy who he had to get his energy out because he would get the shakes when he got nervous. He was going up and down flights of stairs. I'm like, it's Australia and warm, but okay. He was running to get it out.
Mm.
And then I would have somebody else, they had recorded their speech, which I encourage everyone to do as a way to learn it. And they were just standing in a dark stairwell at the bottom with some gym gear, listening to their talk over and over. And somebody else would say, talk to me about anything. Talk to me about your dating life. Talk to me about recipes, anything but this talk, right up until the second I walk on stage. But the thing that I find that the great lesson for that for everyone is once you work out what works for you, do you need to be buoyed up? Do you need to be calmed down? Do you need to be thinking about it till the moment you step on? Do you need to be distracted so you're not nervous about it? Once you work out what works for you, you own that knowledge for life. And you can just apply that again and again and again every time you're about to give a speech or a presentation. And it will make you better and better. So there is no one size fits all because we're all unique and different humans. But once you find the thing that works for you, it's a gift forever.
It shows how unique and individual we are and how we just respond in different ways. And as you say, there's not a one size fits all. But I love those practical exercises you mentioned because they take the kind of ambiguous, overwhelming, scary thing out of it and just breaks it down into the like almost like what can we control here? Let's let's rein this in a bit and be a bit more realistic about that stuff. And the more you rein all that in, the less overwhelming it becomes. And also the standing on the beach, that's awesome too. Like just because I think that eliminates the self-conscious aspect in a way, like a muscle. You're just out there. Okay, everyone's looking at me thinking I'm talking to myself, but it doesn't bother me. And I'm just exercising that muscle.
Absolutely. And sometimes it will very much bother people the first or second time they do it. And sometimes I get people on the phone to me in tears and they're like, this is so hard. I just can't do it. I'm like, cool. Okay. That was bad. Go and do it again and do it again and do it again till you don't care.
Mm.
That's the point. And you will thank me when we get to, when you get to the point where you've overcome it. They're not necessarily thanking me on the first day, but invariably they will get to the end and go, I can do this now. And, it's not just for TEDx events. Sometimes people will talk about in business meetings or when they're presenting to the board. And, sometimes it's accidental, but sometimes there'll be like some malicious person, let's call him Brad, who every time she got up to speak would cough, squeak his chair, move his papers around, and just constantly do things to distract her. And it was throwing her off. I'm like, great. You can stand on a beach and do this and have constant distractions, or you can recite presentations and I will throw things at you. Either of these two are options. Let's try the beach first.
Uh, yeah, I love that in your bio you've talked about adaptation, and I think that's what we're talking about here in terms of I experienced this in bands, like bombing in bands, like just going on stages and dealing with things that went wrong in the moment, things blowing up, um, heckles from the audience, all that type of stuff. Same kind of deal. Uh, that kind of public bombing for me was again, it was a muscle. It was kind of a training ground for me in terms of like dealing with things in the moment and trying to be, you've prepared for this thing. You're trying to perform, and then you just don't know what room you're going to walk into, but then also having an ability to adapt to that room. And the other thing is like just, get the acoustics of a room are crazy as well. Like no room is the same. I had an experience the other week where I started speaking on a mic, and you know, I hadn't spoken on it before I answered the question, and all of a sudden you can get shocked by the voice projection. So yeah, adapting to a room, adapting to the things that can happen at any given moment, and how you address that. If the power goes off, well, maybe rather than freaking out, we make a joke about that or something. But I think those things are hard to plan for. But I had a lot of that in bands. That was kind of the public bombing side of things. But so, how important is this adaptation?
It's essential. And I love what you said about bands. My three sons were in a band together. And one of the first things we taught them was when things go wrong, you just smile because no one knows except you unless your face tells them. Um, and I appreciate what you say when you say, look, it's hard to plan for. But the process I go through with the speakers that I was talking to about before, we try to plan for absolutely everything.
Mm,
It was so funny. We had always had zombie apocalypse on the list, almost in jest, but we've never had the pandemic. So that was kind of like,
mm,
okay, I thought that was overkill, but but there are a couple of things I always say to speakers that and we have a list of tools we give people to prepare for, but two that I think are absolutely vital, when you're preparing for things that could go wrong, um, is to know if you've got a script and you know what you're going to say, you and usually me are the only people who know that. So nobody else in the room knows if you miss a line or if you miss a paragraph unless you tell them with your face. So don't just keep going and it'll be fine. So that's the important thing. People go, oh, sometimes I'll come off stage and go, oh my gosh, I missed a whole paragraph. I'm like, it's fine. Would it have been, I don't tell them at the time, but yeah, it would have been really nice if that paragraph was in there. But the audience doesn't know that. And the second thing is it is absolutely essential that you always have a dead air joke. So we do this for all of our TEDx speakers. We do it for everyone I coach. I give them an option of a number of them, but we do this always because there's always a chance that you're going to forget. You're going to lose where you're up to. Your mind is just going to go blank. One of my clients phoned me one morning. I don't know, it was like 2 a.m. in the shower, and she was doing this enormous presentation. This is a researcher, incredibly competent, talented, brilliant woman, really important social findings. And she had to go and present this research and get approval to do more and support to do more to all of the Australian police and from heads of all the different states and nationally. And she was really concerned that she wasn't going to do it justice because, like you say, nerves, and I talk about healthy nerves versus
mm,
unhealthy anxiety. So healthy nerves is good. A little bit of healthy nerves says this is important. I care about it enough that I want to do it well. And I'm still engaged and interested enough in it that, I'm going to get that little adrenaline kick. They're all good things. When you stop having healthy nerves, you start phoning it in and you should probably switch and do something else because you're not engaged anymore. What you don't want is, paralyzing, unhealthy anxiety. As my husband would say, does it help to feel that way? And if the answer is no, stop it.
mm,
But she was really nervous she was going to forget something or embarrass herself and just totally get lost. And I'm like, great, let's plan for that. Cool. So here is what you're going to do. If that happens, you're going to take a deep breath, and everyone should have one of these dead air lines. And your line for this circumstance is, this was so much easier when I was rehearsing in the shower.
mm,
Because first of all, everyone's going to have a chuckle, I guarantee. And you're going to get a second to take a breath and think about what is your next line. And it'll be great. And I think part of the problem is, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I used to think, if it's not 100% perfect, it's no good. And now I talk about instead the 80-20 rule. So I aim for 80% perfection and 20% authentic human moments. The stuff my former judgy self would have called mistakes. You get a little teary, you get caught up in the moment, you have to take a deep breath, you lose your way for a second, and then, you take a deep breath and get back on it. You make your little dead air joke. This was so much easier when I was in the shower. Or Publix make a speech, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Whatever it is. So this happened to Sarah. She made her comment about the shower. Everybody laughed. And very quickly, she said the entire feel in the room changed. And people who had been quite serious, it's a very stoic profession, was suddenly, willing her on because they too don't like public speaking, and they were in her corner. And she said the rest of the speech went really, really well. They were all incredibly supportive of the research. They might have been going to do that anyway, but it didn't hurt. And afterwards, the people who had facilitated her booking to speak and address them said it was the most engaged they had ever seen that room of people with any of their speakers. And in part, I have no doubt to the fact that she had one of these authentic human moments. She used humor to engage them and make herself endearing and relatable, and then she powered through it. So, yes, there are things that you can do, and it's really important. Public speaking is like any skill. It's like plumbing. If you want to learn how to do it well, get an expert plumber to teach you, learn what's involved, and then practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the better you will get, providing you're applying better knowledge and wisdom as part of the learning, and you're not just doing, the bad version of it for 10,000 hours.
I'm a recovering perfectionist as well. Yeah, it's quite liberating, I think, when you get to a point where you embrace the kind of randomness of, the humanness. But I really like that 80-20 thing, and just humor. There's just I just love the humor aspect. Calling out the thing in the room that sort of helps everybody loosen up. So yeah, that line you're talking about gives a nice little circuit breaker and gives you that moment of pause and shows you that they're on your side. And I also think, just if you're speaking about what you're aligned in and what you've put years of work into, and when it's aligned with who you are and you're kind of the core of what you're trying to do, those are those healthy nerves. I think I've just found it's the situations where I'm trying to do something that's not aligned with me that has caused a bad type of anxiety, because I'm trying. Everyone has a bullshit radar, right? And I just think there's a lot to be said for passion and enthusiasm. And if it's something that, if you're an introverted person and you've put 10 years into this thesis or whatever it may be, if that can just come through, that's so important. And humor as a device within that as well. How important is, like, getting to the kind of structure of a speech? Is there traditional structures and tools? How much of a thing is structure?
Well, structure is incredibly important. And when I talk about structure, or I would like to say that the speech writing is very important rather than the structure. So the storytelling and the writing of it. Um, it's essential. I don't care how charismatic you are, and charisma can be a trap. So there's a lot of times people will have gotten through their life of public speaking on charisma, and you can't blame them if it's always worked. And they're like, people love me and I get laughs. And I'm like, that's lovely. At the end of you speaking in this context, did they do what you needed them to say yes to as a strategic objective? Did they sign the contract? Did they buy the product? Did they say yes to this thing? And often the answer is no, but they really like you and they enjoy and want to take you out for a steak, but they didn't necessarily get to yes. So charisma can be a trap because it often will prevent people from putting in all the smart work beforehand. I'm not doing an audience analysis. Who's in this room? Do they have the power to say yes? What do they currently think about my idea? What are the things that are going to be the objections they're most likely going to list? And how can I strategically weave them into what I'm going to deliver? And my speech or my pitch, so it's already out of the way before we ever get to sitting down and having a chat. So you got to be a bit careful with charisma because it works for people and has worked in their lives. So they've got to be really careful not to forego strategy in favor of charisma. But yes, the speech writing is essential. There are, I'm obviously ludicrously biased because it's what I do, but we get people who, have brilliant ideas. And I mean, this is what I say all the time. Bad presentations are the place where good ideas go to die, because it doesn't matter how good your idea is. It doesn't matter how passionate you are about it. I've had people who have 3 PhDs and are ludicrous experts, and they are so passionate internally about this work, but they don't speak and they can't communicate it, and they don't use the right language, and they don't tell the story that takes people on the journey to get them excited about it. They just want to talk about the thing that they think is exciting and cool. And it's usually not that exciting to anybody else. So the writing is essential. This is I worked with someone a couple of years ago, one of our TEDx speakers, um, um, Danish Kasmi, and he's a geotechnic engineer, and he's working on crushed waste glass. So he's done all the research to show that we're going to run out of beaches if we keep sand mining beaches. So we should stop doing that. And at the same time, we've got this huge environmental problem with crushed waste glass. And so he did all the geotechnical research to show actually if we use crushed waste glass and replace instead of sand when we're constructing roads and buildings and cities, then we won't do all this sand mining and we get rid of an environmental problem. Great, solution solved. But when he first talked about it, I could see the idea was exciting, but oh my gosh, you wanted to fall asleep. Sorry, Dinesh, this is true. And we had to take this incredibly, when you say to somebody, we're going to have a talk on the geotechnical research associated with replacing, no, it doesn't sound sexy or exciting. And I'm like, we've got it. This is really important. You're trying to save global beaches and fix an environmental problem. We have to talk about how to make this sexy and exciting. So, we had to take that script, the initial drafts he sent us, and, there was enormous amounts of redlining and throwing things in the bin. I'm like, it's not what you want to tell them. It's what will make them excited and passionate. And we now have to use words and language and tell stories. And then we had to inject humor. So I'm like, we're going to stick a joke in here. We're talking about sand. There's a line about how there's, sand on beaches and, it's just everywhere. He goes, so I didn't realize there was a problem because when I go to the beach, sand is everywhere, even in the places I don't want it to be. And I'm like, we're going to put this in. He goes, oh, I don't know, very engineer, this is all very serious and it's science and we can't possibly, make light. And the first test reading we did in front of the other speakers for the year, and they were all in hysterics. Also, because he's so straight-faced, he's like the straight man. And they are just in hysterics, and everybody is then dialed in and they listened and listened, and it was communicated in a way that was so engaging and so very different from how it started. And I knew we'd really nailed it when somebody who was one of our regular visitors to our event each year, and he came up and said, I just got to tell you, he's from the marketing and advertising space. He said, you guys always put on great talks. He says, I knew it'd be great, but honestly, I'm going down the program and I'm going, cool, yep, interested. That'll be amazing. That'll be inspirational. This thing on, geotechnical engineering crash waste, I guess that's when I'll check my phone and reply to any urgent messages. I'm like, cool, good to know that's what happens. He goes, no, but I need to tell you, 2 minutes into this talk, I was dialed in. It was my favorite talk of the day. And I've talked to at least 20 people in just the first week, telling them all about this issue with crushed waste glass and what we need to do. So storytelling is everything. The words you choose, the way you structure it, it is everything. And I always say to people, because bad presentations are the place where good ideas to go to die, we have to make sure that we write this not about what you want to say, but what they need to hear, and make it accessible and make it inspiring and motivate people to get to the point where they're going to say, yes, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to go do something about this. So yes, it's, like I say, ludicrously biased, but I've seen really brilliant people who are really passionate about things deliver presentations and just absolutely killed that idea. It's very, very sad to watch because they could totally, given another set of skills and circumstances, that could have been nailed and done great things to amplify and take that idea further out in the world. And it's just not happened, and that's frustrating. It's
The sand,
frustrating to watch.
yeah, for sure. The sand thing's relatable too, right? We all know how like sand gets everywhere. Like that's brings it back to the relatable. In amongst all this complex stuff, it just brings it back to that simple, relatable thing that we all experience all the time, especially in Australia. Um, I guess it's a two-part question. Is it a requirement from TEDx to have a presentation? And do you think presentations are necessary in a speech, or can the speech just hold up to its own, or does it depend on what the context is?
So when you're talking about presentations, you're talking about the slide deck.
Yeah, like a slide deck. Do you think that
Okay.
is that a TEDx requirement, and do you think that that's like necessary for a talk?
No, that's a really great question, actually. So, slide decks, because we talk about the entire thing as the presentation.
Okay.
So, yeah, so the slide decks, no. The first thing we say to all of our speakers, and I do the same with my private coaching clients when they're going to give a keynote, I'm like, we're starting with zero. We're going to pretend that PowerPoint was never invented. Where, thank you so much, Microsoft, 1987, everyone suddenly thinks they're a graphic designer. So what a disservice to that industry. But and to public speaking, people are like, oh, I'll just whip together a PowerPoint. I'm like, no. So no, we start with, you have no slides, none. And then you have to make the case to me that adding a slide is essential. And so our criteria for slides to be added is it has to convey an emotion or demonstrate something that people will rapidly get them into the talk and understanding the impact. So in the case of the Zika talk, for example, Trudy Collette, that woman, she had her usual academic presentation I think she said 123 slides. And so when we went through and said, cool, you can have 12 minutes and you can have 3 slides. And like her head was on fire. And she's like, I can't possibly do that. I'm like, no, you don't need that. I'm like, you can have 3. And I'm being gentle on you. I said, 1 at the initial, when you're talking about the problem, you can have 1 slide that shows the birth defect. And we found a nice, non-offensive photo, but showed about the concave heads that happen with the newborn babies when they've had Zika. And it was so immediately the audience could understand why this is an important issue that we need to eradicate it. Better than her giving a medical definition of the implications. So cool, tick, you can have that slide. And then because it was showing, a scientific lab, and she needed to show, here is the test, here's what the PCR trays look like when there is Zika. And they're all a particular color. I'm like, that's 1 photo. That's your second. And this third slide was when she had applied the Australian native plant extract and there was no visible Zika virus left. I'm like, so that's it. You get 3 slides. Nothing else in this talk requires you to have visual things for people to see. That's it. So yes, some of my absolute favorite TEDx talks have no slides. It is all carried by the person telling a compelling story. They use beautiful language. There are no foreign concepts, so you can imagine it easily. It's relatable. The only time we introduce it is when it's helpful. Maybe it's a chart that is just going to show you something in 2 seconds that otherwise would take 250 words. Maybe it's about conveying the emotion, like the shot of the baby with the Zika consequences, those kind of things. But other than that, we're like, no slides. You've got to justify every single one by those parameters. But otherwise you don't get them. Your beautiful storytelling and your compelling narrative is going to carry what you need to say. It's always a very robust discussion. But it's great when we get to the end. One of the talks we had a couple of years ago was by Katrina Marson. She was a criminal prosecutor and was prosecuting sexual offence cases. And she was becoming so dejected by the fact that by the time it got onto her desk, it was all over. There was nothing she could do except do the prosecuting. She couldn't prevent it from happening. And so she's become this amazing, knowledgeable, formidable advocate for really comprehensive relationship and sexuality education. And so she came and did a talk, and at different times going through that process as we were walking through the script, line by line, piece of data by piece of data, we put things in the side margin, question mark, slide, maybe, and we'll come back and revisit as we're working on the script. And then as we came back in the final revision, we're like, no, doesn't need it, doesn't need it, doesn't need it. And she gave, the final talk, which you can see on YouTube, doesn't have any slides. And I think it's all the more powerful for it. Having said that, immediately after her on the day was Professor Owen Ung, who performed the world's first breast reconstruction surgery using a 3D printed bioscaffold here in Brisbane. So no silicone involved. And that was, complicated to explain how this 3D printed bioscaffold looked. So there was an animation in a slide deck that got played so people could understand it, because it was something we're not at all familiar with. So that was necessary. So we use it as needed.
It's about what's necessary, and visuals can be so powerful. And yeah, it's about not being manipulative, I guess. It's the clarity of the message. And as you said, with the words at the start, trimming them down to 12, it's the same principle with the visuals. Is it necessary? Trim it down to the 3 out of 100. Yeah, I just wasn't sure whether it was a particular requirement, but it's because I've obviously watched many TED Talks myself. But yeah, I think I'm kind of a purist in terms of, like you say, you start at the base, and is the message coming through without anything else around it, and then working from there is pretty cool. I like the name of the business, Full and Frank. I was curious, particularly the frank aspect, because living in Germany as an Aussie. I've had to exercise the muscle in sort of being direct and learning to deal with very direct communication, which I've learned to appreciate. It's also had moments where I've curled up in a ball, particularly early on. But now, particularly in a business sense, I just very much appreciate it when people are very literal, very direct, because you know where you stand. A lot of the kind of fluffiness is taken out, and you just get to the point of things. So I appreciate that, but I also have the Aussie thing, which is, let's not just shoot from the hip kind of thing. But that's the frank aspect. And I guess the full is about having a rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it about having a richness, like a full sort of toolbox, or a richness to the story? Am I close?
It's typically a legal term, or a term that's used in contracts. So I was using it all the time as I was working in business contracts, and you would talk about a full and frank discussion or a full and frank disclosure. Generally means it's going to be comprehensive but blunt. So when I started the company 11 years ago, and I came out and said, I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to use all these skills and these qualifications I've spent all these years amassing, and I'm going to try and do some good in the world. And for me, that means helping people who have brilliant business ideas or social change ideas or research or work they're trying to do, help them amplify it and put it out in the world in the best way possible. But I knew I didn't want to create something that was, super naff, like Juanita Wheeler and Associates. Like, that was just not me. And throughout my career in corporates, I had constantly heard things like, you're incredibly comprehensive. You're absolutely, authoritative, but you're very abrasive. You're very blunt. You're very frank. It would go over better if you just, stroked people's egos a little bit before you told them things. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that tool in my toolkit. So when we came to naming the company, first of all, I was shocked that Full and Frank wasn't trademarked because it's, a term. And so I was thrilled, because Full and Frank is a lot more catchy than comprehensive but blunt. And so that's what we went with. And so now it basically, and I still love it. They always say it's a great company name when you, if, 10 years later, 7 years later, 10 years later, you're still in love with it. And I am. So it's both my brand, but also like a product disclosure statement. So there are people I say, look, if you're looking for the namby-pamby, the stroke your ego, charge you for 2 hours worth of, mollycoddling when I can tell you in 5 minutes what the problem is and we can get to work. Um, you know, go somewhere else. This is what I do. Um, I will only ever tell you exactly what you need to know. I will not waste your time telling you anything that you don't need to know in order to be effective. If I tell you something is bad, it's bad. If I tell you something's really awesome, I mean it because I will always be, authoritative, sincere, blunt. They're the kind of three benchmarks. We say, does this piece of content or does this delivery or does this free guide on how to do public speaking, whatever it is, does this tick these three boxes of the Full and Frank brand? Is it authoritative, sincere, and blunt?
That's an awesome balance between the three, like authoritative, sincere, and blunt. It's a great balance. Like that's what I was saying here. It can be a little bit too blunt at times without the sincerity, So balancing the three, and the website's very cool because it's actually really simple the way you have it. It's just a simple but strong um, message, and you offer various things through that. You've got a number of things. What do you offer primarily? There's courses on there. You have your coaching.
Yeah, so the main things are, first of all, there's free resources. So if people aren't ready to buy and they just want some free resources that will help them, I'm like, great, go to like fullandfrank.com/tools. If it's free and I'm offering it, that's where it is. And then, yes, I have an online course. The course at the moment is how to get the gig. So it's for people who want to do speaking gigs or they think they do. Maybe sometimes people take it and they've been public speaking for 10 years and they realize that maybe they've been flapping their gums and not talking about things in a strategic way. And so it helps them work out how to hone your idea, how to get it into your 12 words or less, how to make the case when you're applying to speak at places, both for you and your idea. So, what is unique about the combo of you and your idea? And then, there are templates in there about how to actually approach people or write applications. So that's the course, and that comes with like once a month you get to catch up with me in a group strategy call. I did one this morning actually. It was great. So people who are in the course then for a year they get to come and say, "How about this course? How about this speaking gig? Am I doing this right?" It's lovely, and then everyone helps each other. It's great community. And then I do one-on-one coaching, which can be, short bits of speech writing. About a year ago, I had somebody come to me as she phoned, and I'd known her for multiple decades, but we'd not worked together. And she was a very experienced, very formidable woman. She'd been in a C-suite for a while, and I got this call. And I was on holidays at the time, but I took it. She's like, "I'm at the point I've got to give this talk in a week's time. I haven't spoken in a long time." She says, "I'm literally at the point where I'd rather quit my job than go and deliver this speech." And I'm like, "Cool, let's not do that." Um, and so that was a few hours of speech writing, like, and drafting to refine her presentation. And she got up and she said it was so good. I walked off the stage thinking, I was thinking I never want to do this again. And by the time I'd walked off the stage, I wanted to, walk back on and do it again. It's like, "Hey, can we go around again?" That was great. Um, so that's great. And then I do the really intensive, the equivalent of TEDx talk prep. So I work with people when they want to develop like their signature keynote. They're at the point where they're like, "I want to have something. I'm going to shop around to the conferences. I want it to lead into a book deal. This is what I want to be known for." And we'll spend, months working on it together, both getting and nailing that script so it has that kind of power and longevity and really consolidates their position as a brand, as an expert in that space. And then we work on the stagecraft. So, they are totally, not only do they have the perfect words, but they are just nailing the delivery. And that's what I do.
It's so comprehensive. It's very cool. The comprehensivity, is that a word? Comprehensivity.
Let's say it is.
uh, it's a tradition on the show to have guests offer a challenge for listeners. Now, I think what you mentioned with the circle on the beach was very cool. I'm gonna try that myself. Um, is there something else that springs to mind, particularly to do with public speaking, or for somebody who perhaps, as you said earlier, is kind of hamstrung a little bit by the thought of even getting on a stage? Is there something that springs, or even something that has helped you personally? Is there something that springs to mind?
I think one of the really helpful things, if you're at the point before you think about, oh, look, maybe I'd like to public speak, maybe I would, maybe I've got something to share, maybe I don't, is to do an activity that I do with my clients, which is about imagine, or they'll say it's a really crowded market. There are already people talking about this. I'll say, great. I want you to think about what idea that you could share with the world that somebody in the world needs to hear right now. I don't care if it's one person, I don't care if it's a million people, but what is something that you could share in 12 words or less that would be of value to somebody? Because that's incredibly important. And, you're not having to get up on necessarily on a TEDx stage or at the UN to do this, but, where could you do it? And people will often, and the reason I introduce the space thing when people say, look, there's nothing and da da da, I'm like, cool, let's assume you're part of the first, human staffed mission to Mars. Um, and you're all going to come back, all four of you, and so people who are booking speakers could book any of you. And I'll say, great. So what is different? You got to think about what is unique. And one of them, maybe it's they're the only person from a particular country, or they're the only person who speaks a particular language. So that is their unique aspect of how they see it. One person might be the only person who went and was away for multiple years, that was married and had multiple children. So, that might be her unique perspective to talk about going and doing this as a mother and being away this long. So, work out, even if this is something you think, oh, everybody knows this and everybody's doing it, what is something that that would add value, that you can bring a unique perspective on? And just start writing all of those down. Start compiling a list. Originally, people will say, I've got none. And after you work on it for a little while, next thing you know, they've got a list of 35 ideas, and we're having a discussion about which one should you pick. Because I'll have crazy people, I mean that in the nicest way, but we'll say things like, oh, I don't have any qualifications, I'm not experienced, there's nothing I can talk about. And then you'll talk to them for a while and they'll say, oh yeah, I dropped out of school, but I have 20 years of experience in the dark side of debt collection, and I know all the secrets. And now I've gone out and started a business on the other side so I can help people get out of it. And I know all the tricks. And I'm like, that's amazing. You've got 20 years of experience and you know all the inside tricks. Let's put that on the list. And, there'll be somebody else who's like, oh, I'm just a stay-home mum and I have 3 kids with disabilities. I'm like, okay, you need to write that, because there are people who are in that space who need to hear your survival tips and your thriving tips and all of that. Like, write these things down. People usually end up getting a dedicated notebook. So start with one, but be prepared to add to it, because each day or once a week, something's going to come and happen to you, and you're going to realize, wow, I have an absolute wealth of ideas and things that I could share, that their lives would be better if they knew this information, and I am uniquely placed to tell them. And so then next time someone says, maybe you should give a speech, or hey, do you want to get up and talk about something, or there's a speaking spot available or a call for speakers at some event, pull out your notebook, go to your list and go, that one, and then be bold and apply.
It's like, what have you got the keys to, or what have you what are the things that you've found the key or the solution to in your own experiences? And I guess some people don't realize, in the scheme of their lives, the specific nature of those things you're talking about, what that are unique to them. And that spaceship thing's cool. It's like, if the 4 people came down, what's each one offering? So there's fullandfrank.com. Where can people find you?
Yes, absolutely. Fullandfrank.com, or you can find me on social medias, usually slash Full and Frank, or on LinkedIn with Juanita Wheeler.
Oh, this has been really awesome. I think it's, in terms of giving people a voice, and you coming from an introverted background and now being in this amazing coaching position and all that you've done. It's great stuff. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight talking to you.
There you go, guys. Honest ratings for the show on Apple are appreciated. If you have a guest suggestion, please feel free to reach out on my website at danielthomas.co. I'm also on social media at Mr. Dan Thomas. Catch you on the next episode.